Before we jump in, I wanted to let you know about something new. I'm really excited about it. It's called The Nest, our online community, and I'd love to see you inside. Each month, I'm hosting 2 live virtual sessions where we can come together for group coaching, body doubling, real conversations, and occasional guest experts who'll share their wisdom with us. You'll also get access to the community itself, where you can meet fellow Wise Squirrels, you can get episodes early, tap into extra resources, and you can enjoy plenty of good things I'm adding along the way. It's all waiting for you in the nest. Visit wisesquirrels.com/nest for details, and I'll see you inside. Welcome to Wise Squirrels, the podcast for late diagnosed adults with ADHD. I'm your host, Dave Delaney. Ooh, I lost my voice there. I'm thrilled to have you here with me. Thank you for joining. If this is your first time, it's always awesome to have new listeners of the podcast, so welcome. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Gail Saltz. Dr. Saltz is a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, a best-selling author, and a trusted voice on mental health in the media. She's the author of The Power of Different, the link between disorder and genius. And keep listening to the end of the episode to find out how you might be able to win a copy of her book. She's an associate professor of psychiatry at the New York Presbyterian Hospital and a psychoanalyst with the New York Psychoanalytic Institute. She also serves as a medical expert for Physicians for Human Rights and maintains a private practice in Manhattan. You might also be familiar with her work. She frequently appears on television, shows like The View and Oprah and many others. So you're in for a treat today. One of the things I try to do with Wise Squirrels is to obviously remove stigmas and question misinformation and disinformation. But the other day, I was the source of misinformation. And I should define, by the way, misinformation is incorrect information that people unknowingly share. So they're not trying to cause a problem. They're just accidentally sharing something that is incorrect. But disinformation is something entirely different. Disinformation is information that you share that you know is wrong, perhaps with the intent of harming people or making some fast money. And a couple of weeks ago, I screwed up. So I posted actually on my personal threads, Dave Delaney, which you can follow me there. I posted something and I've deleted it since, but I did address it in the comments to the people who commented to me. And what I wrote was something to the effect, I can't remember if it was it was a thread. And what I wrote was something that I believe to be true and have since been corrected. What I had stated was that until 2013 in the DSM-5, an adult could not be diagnosed with ADHD. I've gone through transcripts. I'm trying to figure out how I got this idea in my head. It's not true, though, and people called me out for it, and with good reason, and I'm glad they did. And if you heard the last episode of the podcast and downloaded it right away when the new episode was available, you would have the copy of it with my stating that incorrect information. After realizing my mistake, I edited that episode. So I went back in and I ripped out that part of the conversation where I stated that because clearly I was wrong. And then I added a call out box with the correction for those of you who might have heard me say that. Again, if you downloaded the episode a little later, you wouldn't have heard that at all anyway. I corrected that. And for those of you who called me out on threads for my incorrect information, I do want to say thank you for pointing that out. And to correct that, by the way, it wasn't that ADHD couldn't be diagnosed. It could be diagnosed. It was just much harder. A doctor could diagnose an adult with ADHD. However, they didn't as frequently. The guidelines weren't really clear. And so a lot of people didn't get the diagnosis they probably needed. But thankfully, that has changed. If you ever hear something incorrect or questionable or what have you from me or from a guest, I encourage you to reach out to me, Dave at wisesquirrels.com, or you can just go to wisesquirrels.com and you can find the contact information there. And while you're on the website, by the way, I do publish a lot of articles that I write. I also publish them on Substack. I publish much more on Substack. And of course, if you're a paid member there, you'll be able to access those. It's like the cost of a coffee a month. And I do want to give a shout out to those of you who support me that way. So thank you for that. But I do publish articles on the website when I come across misinformation or worse, disinformation. Some examples of this include the terrible New York Times Magazine article that was like a cover piece about over-medicating kids with ADHD and over-diagnosing them. And there were so many incorrect points in that article that not only did I feel a need to write the correction myself and to write an article about that to set the record straight, I actually tapped into Dr. Russell Barkley's video where he also tore it apart, and I paraphrased much of what he said in that article. And more recently, I came across a video on YouTube with like 350,000 views from a former chiropractor who goes by the name Dr. something or other. And technically he is a doctor, even though he's not a medical doctor. He's a former chiropractor. And he makes the statement in this video why vitamin B3 is the best natural remedy for ADHD, which is BS. And I posted that on wisesquirrels.com. I should add that this person is also shilling for his vitamin company. Go figure. He has an online company that sells vitamins, among other things, supplements and so on. So, it seemed a little suspect to me. And that gets into the whole disinformation thing, right? Because if you knowingly share misinformation and continue to do so, I think that's a huge problem. And there's so much incorrect information out there about ADHD, certainly on social media. And so, I want to make sure that I'm doing my best work here to dispel those myths. This is the last episode of the season, and I am on track of perhaps reaching 100,000 downloads this year. And that is a huge thing. And I do really have to have you to thank for that. You're here, you're subscribed to the show, following the show, listening, leaving your review, your rating, and all this stuff really does help. And sharing the interviews with your friends is also extremely helpful in spreading the word about Wise Squirrels. So I do want to say thank you so much to everybody who has contributed that way by just spreading the word. If you've been listening for a while, you'll be familiar with something new that I started called The Nest. I really want to get to know you better. I really want to use this platform to help people. And of course, I do have expenses involved, so I want to try to keep things as low as possible. I created The Nest, which you can find at wisesquirrels.com/nest, which is the online community for Wise Squirrels. The fee is $30 a month. I feel like that's a pretty good amount. But for the remaining of December, if you use the coupon code December, I'm going to split it in half and give it to you for $15 a month for your first year, which is pretty good. That's a pretty good deal. So I hope you at least visit wisesquirrels.com/nest. Check out what's in store for you. It's an online community. I do 2 live sessions a month with you. That could be a combination of group coaching. Sometimes it's body doubling, working together, supporting one another. I also have access to on-demand trainings and recordings that I do. You'll be able to join the group and connect with other late diagnosed adults with ADHD and experts as well. Plus, I will include some other fun stuff that I have in store. So I do encourage you to head on over, check it out. It's $15 a month. And that's available until January 1st when the price goes back up to $30 a month, which I still think is a pretty sweet deal. And I do want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Inflow. Inflow has been a very generous sponsor of Wise Squirrels, and I am very thankful for their support of the show. You can get a free ADHD traits quiz if you visit wisesquirrels.com/inflow. When you go there, just follow the prompts. It's free. What's really cool about it is it takes you gradually through a process of better understanding your presentation of ADHD, but also it gives you all these different pieces of advice, recordings, and a lot more. The Inflow app, of course, is also something they have, which is super cool, which you can find again from wisesquirrels.com/inflow. In the app, they've got like little mini podcast recordings to help you. Everything's customized for each individual based on their needs, their age groups, all that stuff. So I do encourage you to head over to wisesquirrels.com/inflow. Give it a try, download the app, let them know that you heard about Inflow here on Wise Squirrels. They also have Quinn, which is their AI ADHD coach, which is a pretty ingenious idea, I think, and something I do encourage you to also check out while you're there. So wisesquirrels.com/inflow. And of course, I want to say happy holidays. It's super special to have you here, and I sincerely appreciate it. Any way that you support the show just by being here and listening is enough for me. So I do want to say thank you. I wish you a very happy holiday. Give yourself some grace. 2026 is going to be bigger, brighter, and better for everybody. I know it. I feel it. So don't let the news get you down. Don't let social media get you down. Yes, there are challenges out there. Absolutely. But I really do believe that together we can rise above all that noise and support one another. So thank you. Happy holidays. And now let's listen to my interview with Dr. Gail Saltz.
I am Dr. Gail Saltz, and I am a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst. And I'm a psychiatrist at the Weill Cornell Medical College and a psychoanalyst with the New York Psychoanalytic Institute. And I do a lot of what I'll call public education. So that, and I have for decades now, whether that is news shows on all manner of mental health issues, to radio programs, to podcasts. I have some. And I'm involved with medical organizations. I'm the head of communications for the American Psychoanalytic Association. And I think relevant to today, my latest book is The Power of Different, the link between disorder and genius, where I do talk about the important understanding of the hardwiring behind symptoms that cause us to suffer from mental health issues, being part and parcel of the same wiring that causes people to have potential great strengths. And ADHD is certainly one of those issues.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Well, I know with psychoanalysis, and sometimes I don't know if everybody knows the differences in treatments and styles. And by the way, I'm not a doctor and I never pretend I'm one on the internet or anywhere else for that matter. So I wanted to let you know about that too. But I know with you, it was after your residency of psychiatry that you went into psychoanalysis. Tell me a little bit about psychoanalysis. I think like CBT probably rolls into that too, but I won't put words in your mouth.
No worries. So I currently, am still a psychiatrist, which basically means, right, unlike a psychologist, I went to medical school. I can prescribe medications. And psychoanalytic training allowed me to further develop my therapeutic skills in the area that has to do with therapies that help make what's unconscious in your mind conscious, so that they the insight and making it conscious prevents those unconscious conflicts and thoughts and wishes from driving behavior and feeling states that may be causing you problems in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So in a nutshell, psychoanalytic treatment, it can be a very intensive treatment multiple times a week, looking at these conflicts, but it also can be what is called a psychodynamic treatment, which is sort of the same principles, but light, in that, it could be once a week, twice a week. And it is different from cognitive behavioral therapies, which I also learned in my residency training and talk about and work with, which has more to do with looking at conscious thoughts that are in conflict or maybe cognitively not consistent with reality in some way that is driving bad feeling states and behaviors, and purposely changing that thought and therefore the behaviors. It's different in that, it doesn't look back at your past history, things from your childhood that may be shaping your current life, in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy. So there are different modalities of therapy that are, depending on the person and their psychological issues, right, can be better. And so I'm invested in understanding what a particular patient might need, and using the modality that would be most helpful.
Yeah. And I know, getting the support for the wise squirrels, as I like to call them, myself included, people that are late diagnosed adults, right? With, by the way, I say that because wise comes from the wisdom we've accrued through our lives, through coping mechanisms and masking and things unknowingly, with ADHD and not knowing it, but still surviving and reaching successes, whatever those may be. But the fact that I'm sitting here talking to you is a great success, right? And I can go out later and go take my cute little dog out for a walk and kiss my wife when she gets home and rub her feet. Like, I have a great life. But for 50 of those years, I didn't know I had ADHD. And so
I actually just did a talk at the 92nd Street Y. I don't know if you're familiar with it, in New York City.
Yeah.
Where I did basically a talk about how many people are not diagnosed until adulthood. And in fact, often, and I see this all the time, they come in because their child just got a diagnosis, right?
Yeah, and it's usually women now.
Exactly. And they go, men too. Their child got a diagnosis, and they go, but this was me. This was me completely. I am the same as my child, and I never got this diagnosis. Wait. And then they come in. And so that is a very common scenario. And, the reasons for that are many, right? There's everything from, as you started this show with today, stigma was so very prevalent, that the last thing anybody wanted to do was make a diagnosis about anything, to be honest with you, right? Yeah. And so we really suppressed, I think, the knowledge base about these things and the willingness to look at a kid who is struggling or a young adult who's struggling and investigate why they might be struggling and give it a name, and seek treatment because of stigma. I would say that is the number one reason. We knew less, and we unfortunately just called a lot of kids, lazy or a bad student or stupid, and damaged their self-esteem and lost them to a system that was probably would have benefited them dramatically. And so by the time you've lived through all that as a young person, you certainly are not thinking about, maybe I've got some very specific kind of problem that could be getting treatment. You're not thinking that. You're just thinking you're lazy and dumb and not a good student. So we didn't diagnose much in a couple of decades ago, right? And that a lot of kids weren't diagnosed a couple of decades ago. So they didn't grow up knowing that this was something, right? They didn't. And then, there was also sort of a mythology, well, like whatever that is just rambunctiousness and adolescence and all these things. And then you grow out of it, which, most people with ADHD, some symptoms may change, but they don't really grow out of it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think it was Tommy Tuberville. I know it was Tommy Tuberville, who's like, I forget it. I think he's a senator or something. But I have a quote that I've used in some of the training and things that I've done, that he basically was questioning RFK Jr. and saying, back in my day, we would just kick, beat the kids, beat this distraction out of the kids. And like talking about corporal punishment. It's like, Jesus, man, like you were part of the problem in such a major way, because
there's a high preponderance of men in the prison system who have ADHD. I mean, that's really, right. So what did you teach them? You taught them they couldn't survive in school. They were lost to the educational system. And they did start getting into trouble. And you hit them and you taught them, like, this is the way to go, it's not good.
Well, I mean, we are, and you can always correct me where I'm wrong, of course, but like my understanding, as far as like our craving for dopamine and our, like the likeliness of addiction, different addictions taking place, there's that aspect to it where, and just like the impulsivity of like shoplifting something or just in a moment, right? Which can obviously end you up if you're untreated and you have no idea you have ADHD, or how I always call it my operating system, right? Of how your operating system works, then yeah, exactly to your point. Like you just think you're a loser and that's what you've been told all your life. So, so on a happier note, I did want to ask you though, when I was talking about those different kind of forms of psychiatry and, and I know it's different for different people, but there's certainly some boxes to be ticked for adults who have just been diagnosed, as far as what the treatments should be considered. And again, without putting words in your mouth, but my understanding is the importance of medication, certainly, stimulants and things, and therapy, I think, like, and maybe an ADHD coach or someone. But I wish, from my own experiences, I've kind of gone from my GP to a psychiatrist who prescribed me different meds and I wish I could have just, snapped my fingers and found like the right meds in the right way. And it took some trial and error, not in a bad way, but, just trying to find the right medication, but also the right dose, and making sure it plays well with my anti-anxiety medication, which I am also now on as a one of the popular bedfellows of ADHD. My psychiatrist isn't into talking much. She's like, she's not pushing drugs, because I'm very careful about that, being a Canadian Canarican now, I guess. She kind of manages the medication. And now I have a new psychiatrist I had a therapist and I've switched to a new psychiatrist who does a lot of talk therapy and doesn't want to deal with medication. And I wish it was all under one hood so that it all communicated well together. But getting to that question again, which is like, if somebody was just diagnosed, what are maybe 3 things they should be doing?
Hey, it's Dr. George Sachs, co-founder of Inflow and proud sponsor of Wise Squirrels. If you're living with ADHD, you know it's not just about the focus. That's why we created Inflow. And our newest tool, Quinn AI, an empathetic ADHD micro coach. Together, they're designed by expert clinicians to help you understand your brain, build habits that actually stick, and feel less alone in the process. Take the free ADHD traits quiz at wisesquirrels.com/inflow to get started.
Well, wow. So you just there's a lot there that you explained, and I
have
think
ADHD.
for people to understand now that yours is sort of a classic story in many different ways, right? Of yes, a lot of people with ADHD have what are called in psychiatry comorbidities, other diagnoses that come along, sometimes because of the symptoms of the ADHD, right? Like, it's very anxiety provoking to be in a world where you are constantly measuring yourself against others and finding, I can't stay as organized, or I'm screwing up things, or another mistake is around the corner, or I'm going to do something impulsive and it'll be bad or dangerous, or, all of that, right? So it is anxiety producing, but also your wiring is such that you have a higher likelihood of struggling with an anxiety disorder. Same reason a substance abuse disorder, right? A mood disorder. And so really the deal with ADHD is, because it doesn't look the same in everyone, everything for reasons that have everything to do with like comorbidities, but also just everybody's ADHD doesn't look the same, especially as an adult, right? Some people have more problems with impulsivity as it plays out in their social world, relating to others. And some people have more difficulty with executive function issues as it relates to organization in their workplace. Like it really varies. So people need a very individual and tailored treatment. And as you're bringing up, right, somebody who really knows what they're doing, and will ask a really appropriate and nuanced history to be able to elucidate the symptoms that really are causing you the most problems. Because essentially, right, we're not treating ADHD. We can't change the wiring of that, what I sort of refer to as kind of that faulty switch in your default network that, you can't as easily decide when to turn it on and when to turn it off. But it does turn on and off. And as you're pointing out, responsive to the dopamine reward system. But what are the symptoms that this is causing? And that's what we're going to treat, your particular symptom formation. And then, as you're saying, there are two different modalities of sort of getting at that. I, as someone who can prescribe medication, but also can do therapies, I'm always a big proponent of starting with therapies first to sort of see how far you'll get, unless someone really is pretty far out on the symptom of some particular sort. So much so, for example, if it's anxiety, that it prevents the learning of the therapy skills because you're so anxious that your frontal lobe is essentially offline, consumed with anxiety, then you can't learn therapy. And this is true of other issues, not just ADHD. Yeah. Then we do want to add medication right away. So it's looking at that. There are, as you've again elucidated, pointed to, there are medications that are better for some people than others. And unfortunately, it is some trial and error. Does this medication work for you? How many side effects does it cause? How tolerable are those side effects? Can we do anything with dosage and time of day such that it mitigates those side effects? And so you kind of might have, you start with a typical, and then, you might have to make a change. Yeah. So that is true, but I wouldn't always start with that, depending on, as I said, the symptoms and how severe they are. I might start with, you kind of referred to it as coaching, which is basically teaching what I call workarounds for the very specific things that are causing problems. If, for example, it's executive function, organizational things, then, there are very specific techniques to address, you're reading a document, the document has directions. It has, have you got, or the answer is probably you don't have the innate executive function tool that maybe somebody with ADHD does have. You need to be taught, okay, every time I see something that is, a direction, as I hit it, I'm underlining that. I'm circling this. I'm I'm creating file system in my home so that I don't keep losing X. That very specific sort of extraneous hard drive for you to utilize that can make a real difference and does make a real difference. That can be done in social interactions, or that could be done in work interactions. It depends on where the issues lie. And I really would always recommend that, because unlike medication, which is sort of a Band-Aid and only works while you're on the medication, these things are like lifelong tools, right? That will serve you.
Yeah.
And then psychotherapy is, if the issue, for example, is a lot of anxiety, then yes, a cognitive behavioral therapy, and we're not talking about forever, maybe 10 sessions, to identify the cognitions, the thoughts that are anxious thoughts, examine them, essentially, if you will, rewrite them.
Yep.
And note the impact on behaviors can be super helpful to people who have anxiety, period. And, but certainly with ADHD. So there's a role for these things for people who have, a lot of symptoms. A combination is best. But today in our country, unfortunately, many people just, only feel they have access to, or time for, or money for their GP giving them a med. And then, that has a limited value.
And there's also sort of this, I mentioned earlier, I'm from Canada, but I've been in the States, in Nashville here for 18 years. So long enough to know that as a culture, Americans, not picking on anyone specifically, but as a culture, and not really to Americans' fault necessarily. I mean, you can't advertise all these drugs in other countries. It's only here that you put on Netflix and suddenly you're berated by ads about every bloody pill in the world, and ask your doctor about X and ask your doctor about Y. And it's like, how about trust your doctor to know about X and Y and to recommend something to you? And so, don't get me started on that, because
don't get me started on that either.
Yeah, but I've been thinking about that a lot, actually, because I was listening to a podcast recently about one thing that I did in 2020 when the world was imploding, and, I had my own stresses. Tornado destroyed my kid's school, and then we were blown out of our house for 3 months after a storm. And in addition to all the other, of course, things that were affecting everybody in 2020, that was before I knew I had ADHD, and I made a lot of changes to improve myself for personal reasons, and, including quitting drinking. That's I'm 5 years sober, start mindfulness and meditation, and take that seriously for a change. I've interviewed Joseph Goldstein here on the podcast, who is just incredible. And I highly recommend everybody listen, and Diana Winston as well. And to some of the stuff you mentioned too, as far as cognitive behavioral therapy, I had Russ Ramsey on, and he's great about CBT, especially for ADHDers. And Lydia Zylowska also on talking about ADHD and mindfulness and meditation, because I recently interviewed Ellen Langer about mindfulness, and she's not really into the whole meditation thing. She's more into just being mindful in the moment. But I think you were touching on that, about, I forget the word you said, but I think you were getting at reframing, right? Thoughts, these negative thoughts, and maybe helping to rewrite our stories. But I was also thinking about the podcast I was listening to recently. It was Dan Harris's podcast, 10% Happier. And he was talking with a Buddhist psychiatrist or psychologist, I can't remember, on a recent episode. And they were talking about happiness. And from an outsider's perspective, being Canadian and living in the States, I'm sympathetic to Americans. When you look at these lists of the world's happiest countries, America is never on there. Or if it is, it's near the bottom or quite low. And you're like, how the hell is that possible? We have an abundance of everything. And I can walk outside and, I'm not in the outskirts of Kiev or anywhere else for that matter. We're not in a war. Most Americans don't know what war even is to experience it. I mean, and so we have so much privilege in this country, but I feel like the system, and especially in this day and age, we don't have to go there, but I feel like the system is built to keep us anxious, whether it's the media, whether it's social media algorithms, and it's also this lack of access to healthcare. Like any other country, when I moved to the States, I was speaking to a neighbor who's my best friend here. And I said, "Who's your GP?" And he's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Your GP." He's like, "What's that?" And I'm like, "Your general practitioner. Who's your family? Who's your doctor?" And he's like our pediatrician, you mean, for the kids? And I'm like, "No, dude, who is your doctor? Because I need a doctor." And he's like, "Oh, I don't have a doctor." And I'm like, "But don't you go for annuals to get, checkups and things?" And he's like, "No, I only go if I'm like sick." And that's such like an American way. And I'm like, "Dude, you take your car to get tune-ups and oil changes, right?"
Yeah.
Like, you don't just take it in when it's not running. And I feel
we don't have a great psyche here for preventive healthcare, right? And but moreover, we have no psyche here for preventive mental health care, which I try to talk about. But it's a concept that's very foreign to people. The idea that you would take care of your brain, your mind, in a way to try to prevent the kinds of issues that can present later.
It's frustrating to me because as I said, I don't fault Americans because we live in a massive media echo chamber, and many Americans have never left the country, or I've met Americans who haven't left Tennessee. And so if you don't leave the country, I love St. Augustine, I think, wrote this line I love about the world being a book. And for those who haven't traveled, they've only lifted one page, because it takes travel. Like, I met my wife in Ireland, of all places, and who's from Tennessee. And we lived abroad in different countries over the years and things. And when you live and travel, you get to see how other people are. And if you go to Scandinavia, you're like, oh, that's why they don't need the fanciest new TV or new car. They're happy with what they have, but they also don't have to worry about healthcare because it's free and they can go when they need it. And the government wants preventative healthcare because they don't want to pay tons of money on keeping everybody alive. And it's just like, let's talk about a more important topic. I want to hear about the time that you won the blueberry pie eating contest at your college.
Wow, you dove deep in figuring out who I was.
And man, who doesn't love blueberry pie first?
I have not been asked that on a podcast. Okay. Actually, it's very funny. I just was back last week doing a public lecture at Lehigh University to undergrads and grad students and professors about this content that we're talking about today, or basically, neurodiversity and the hardwiring of particular strengths. And so I was reminded of my college days, which did include this zany competition of a blueberry pie eating contest. You couldn't have gotten me to do a hot dog eating contest. No way. No. But you said blueberry pie? Okay, then.
Heck yeah, man. I would sign up for that right now.
Exactly. So I was like, yeah, I think I just died and went to heaven, and I'm a competitive gal. And so I won.
The rest is history. No, I love that. And if that's your most embarrassing story from college, I think you're okay. Right?
I think I'm okay.
I feel so badly.
That's my the public one. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel so badly for my kids who are both at college now. And I'm like, just don't put it on the internet. Don't put it on the internet. Don't take any digital photos. And one of the things I like about you too is the fact that way back when you appeared on Oprah, or I think a few times, you turned down your own TV show to protect your own clinical integrity. And I think that's a pretty cool move because there's a lot of quacks these days who are sharing all sorts of misinformation or disinformation, even just to sell a product and it's a shame because, and I think that's often the business. I mentioned, I've been podcasting for 20 years. That is sort of the business model of podcasting now is, many of the podcasters I enjoyed suddenly they would start platforming bad people with bad ideas and those would spread to millions of listeners. And suddenly they got more clicks, more listens because of that controversy. And so then they continue platforming people. And that's the business model, and they get more money.
Very
And
hard.
it's like,
Very hard. That is the industry. It's been that way for a long time. And I think, when I first started doing TV things, no one was talking about mental health. So it was a novel in and of itself, right? And that was good. But really over time, I guess I'll say people become desensitized to the novel, and they want more, they want something else, there were some, crazy, I guess somebody came to me and wanted to do some show on like fears and phobias, and we should drive down, I should be part of a caravan, and we would drive down Route 66 and like dangle people over a cliff to explore their fear of and I was like, no.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. I know that was the days of like Fear Factor and putting people in like a crate of spiders. And I'm like, that's not, I guess you could technically call that flooding, which, has been explored as a treat, but that's a terrible thing to do to people. I'm a healer. I don't, I cannot do that. And of course, so anyway, as I'm sure everybody will notice on talk shows or shows of any sort, they more than push the window. And, it becomes like, I really, at heart, I'm a physician, and
Yeah. And you've taken an oath, and hopefully you stick to that, because that's what, So you talk about like, not just like being like having a disorder, but rather a different sort of a brain difference, as you say. Let's talk, and obviously with a focus on ADHD, because, that's primarily my focus of this podcast. Of course, there's other things that come along with that, but, and we can talk about this too, with your new book. And obviously we need to understand our strengths. And I think a lot of times, it's funny, like every productivity expert I know, and I know a bunch of them who are authors and things, every productivity expert I know, knowing what I know about ADHD now, I'm like, oh geez, like all of these people have ADHD for sure, whether they're diagnosed or not. I'm like, my little ADHD detector. And it's interesting because I find so many, even like Einstein and other famous people who are now no longer with us and who were never really diagnosed, Steve Jobs and others, certainly seem like they probably were candidates for ADHD. And I think a lot of the times ADHDers, especially when you're undiagnosed, you are going out of your way. This is what I've done a lot of my career, in my book and things, is solving problems that I'm experiencing, assuming everybody else has those problems. And everybody else does have the problems. There's only so many problems in the world, right? So we may have problems with just arriving places on time and productivity, or cleaning our homes. And yes, you can have those problems, and be neurotypical, but I think that it's the ADHDers who tend to maybe solve these problems somehow. I don't know. Tell me a little bit about the book and your thoughts on tapping into these strengths while also not, diminishing the importance of treating ourselves.
Well, to your point, right? All mental health diagnoses are, as you just alluded to, things that everybody experiences, but to some degree that it compromises your functioning in some arena, or maybe many arenas, right? Everything. And so there isn't such a sharp line as people would like to believe. They would like to say, oh, that's mental illness, and I'm over here in the non-mental illness camp. And at some point or another, close to half of all Americans will struggle with some mental health issue. And to some degree, that's because we have over 100 billion neurons and 100 trillion synapses in the brain. And if you look at data from the Human Connectome Project, done many years ago, they looked at 1,200 normal brains. You would find that there is variation, right? There's so much wiring, right? There's variation person to person. There's some variations. So when you've got close to half of people struggling with something, symptom of some sort, it's hard to call it abnormal, and And so I feel like what's more useful is to think of these things as, yes, some variation in the wiring to a degree such that you experience symptoms that impair your function. And that's true for ADHD, right? There are people who are more easily able to concentrate and were less easily able to concentrate volitionally. There are people who have more impulse control than others. There are people that have more restlessness than others. There are, so any of these things. But when it in the wiring, the symptom is so much so that it impairs your ability to sit in school and learn, or be at work and be productive, and be in your social life and not have millions of fights and maintain a marriage and all those things, then that cluster may fit the criteria of the DSM-5 diagnosis, which I need to use, and people in my area need to use. Why? So that we can talk to insurance companies and get you reimbursed, and talk to each other, and maybe have a shorthand for something about why this medication or what the trajectory looks like, et cetera. But really, it's more important for all of us to think about symptom clusters and differences in the wiring that create those symptom clusters. Because when you come into our offices, we're going to be treating your symptoms. We're not going to be you're not a walking ADHD, right? We're going to be treating your symptom.
Yeah.
And so I think what's also important for people to understand that if you look at the collection of research that has been done, the neuroscientific research in the last decade or so, it becomes really, really apparent that those wiring differences, right, are neurons, 100 billion neurons, they connect, and there is circuitry that makes all different parts of the brain talk to other different parts of the brain. And when something is different, it doesn't cause one thing. It's not like there's one path that's like talking, or one path that's like, this experience, or this, impulsivity. Yeah. It means that a lot of things may be changed. And so there are these correlations between certain symptom collections that confer the DSM-5 diagnosis of ADHD and potential for really great strength. And they make a lot of sense, because if you think of that, the difficulty concentrating is because this switch in your default network, which houses daydreaming and imagination and creative thought, spends much more time in the off position than you would ideally like to work on some important work of yours, because it's boring. Because if it weren't boring to you, then you would be hijacking the dopamine system, and you would be, in fact, hyper-focusing, because that switch would be on. It would be so on, more on than somebody who doesn't have ADHD. So that's a potential strength.
Yeah.
So in other words, one of the pathways to helping adults is, how can you harness that potential strength of hyperfocus by funneling stuff you got to work on through a prism of stuff that really jazzes you.
Yeah. And keep the novelty there.
Keeping novelty, but also like interest. How do you layer it with something interesting to you?
Yeah.
That's one area. But the fact that the default network may mean you spend a lot more time daydreaming means that your amount, like sheer quantity of creative thinking, original thinking, innovative thinking, ideas is greater. And so, as you've alluded to, you see a preponderance of CEOs of self-started companies, IKEA, Virgin Atlantic, have a known diagnosis of ADHD. Not surprising. In their many, many, many daydreamy thoughts and innovative thoughts, they came up with the idea. And another wiring strength of the flip side of impulsivity is that where somebody else might go, I got to think about this thought for a long time. And I don't know, I'm not really sure, and it sort of dribbles out. the person with ADHD goes, this is an exciting thought. I am pumped. I'm excited. I'm going. I am running. And the problem for adolescents with ADHD, which is that they're a lot more willing to take risks, also part of the wiring.
Yeah.
And you might need to have them on a stimulant so that they don't drive too fast or drive drunk or do something, have unprotected sex or something risky.
Mm-hmm.
For the guy who came up with a innovative, cool thought that they're going to run with, they're undeterred by those. They're like, this risk excites me.
Yeah.
I'm going to go for it.
How do we make this is really interesting to me and helpful. You know, a lot of the times when I speak about ADHD, from everything I've learned, I mentioned it there too, this curse of craving novelty, where you find a system or something you enjoy that helps you get the job done, whatever it is. And then the novelty runs off, and suddenly it's like, I don't like doing it this way anymore. But that aside, professionally speaking, a lot of what I've done in my career is public speaking. I do a lot of keynote presentations. I do a lot of workshops and facilitate, all around communication strategy, ultimately, and building relationships and things. And my book is about networking and genuine, nice networking, not icky. I need to wash my hands and get out of here. You've got me thinking too, like, and the impulsivity thing of just, and the the hyper focus, this podcast was born that way, right? Like I built Wise Squirrels in a weekend and launched. Like, I'm like, let's do this. Right. And I find the question I'm beating around the bush here on is, land the plane, Dave, is the sandwich. Like, how can we get a sandwich of our interests together so that the novel, so for example, I now, knowing what I know about my operating system now, I know why I love standing on stages. Yes, I trained with Second City in Toronto, and improv is, I love improv and comedy and things and performance. So that's already there in the background. And I'm a ham and an extrovert. And so there's that. But I love standing on stages, and knowing now and what I've learned about ADHD, I realize, oh my God, it's the rush of the dopamine from the audience. And shaking hands and hugging people and stuff afterwards. I'm like, it's so much dopamine. And I'm like, oh, that's also why I love it. So how can we professionally, as adults, sandwich in these layers of things that we're interested in? Like, I love speaking with people like you and doing this podcast, but at the end of the day, I'm a terrible businessman or business person. Right. And it's like, okay, I have a great sponsor right now, but I need to quantify and monetize everything I do, or they're just hobbies. So, I get paid to speak. So I've kind of figured that part out, but how can what I'm trying to get at is, like, how can you sandwich all these interests together into a role or a career or a business?
Yeah. I mean, what I would say is the first thing is real self-awareness. It is really like sitting in, which a lot of people don't do, and identifying, what do I really like? What really does float my boat? Like you're saying, like, I knew I liked to get on stage and do, I gravitated toward it, and I get a rush every time I do it. Like, you identified. So, like, identifying, which is not the case for everyone. It's not like universally people love getting on stage. Some people really would not enjoy that, right?
Most.
Some people would be like, I really love whatever it is, something very like coding, precise, something that I get in a state of flow. I feel like it's super interesting. You have to identify what is, as you said, stimulates your reward system, because it holds great interest.
Yeah.
You find the experience very rewarding. And then it is also important to identify, like, what you have aptitude for. And you might be able to do that on your own. You might. If you struggle with that, I do recommend things like neuropsychological testing, which will tell you something about your strengths, your individual strengths. Oh, I'm really a visual spatial person. I'm really like, because there are other parts of your brain, right, that come to bear, irregardless of ADHD, that I'm really a visual learner. I'm really an auditory learner. I'm really, so neuropsych testing can be helpful in that. Some of those career counseling sort of tests can be helpful for pinpointing interest and affinity. But those two things matter: aptitude, interest, affinity. So you want to go through the prism of those things.
Yeah.
And then in addition, there will be things that frankly you're not good at, right? And often for people with ADHD, they are the really detail-y oriented, and something maybe that you find dry, and, maybe like being a paralegal would be really hard for you, something. But that doesn't mean you can't do a field or you can't do an area. What it means, to me at least, is it's important to present yourself as great for pairing with. So you, for example, in your story that you just presented, it would be good for you to pair with somebody who's like, I am so a business guy. I am so the money man.
Yes.
Woman. And I love to do that. Like, how do I make this train, which is like, super hot and red and cool and spurts all this, but I like to make that train run on time. I'm really good at that.
Those are the hard ones to find. I've tried to partner with those because they're usually the ones presumably doing well, right? And it's the creatives like me who are like, squirrel,
Yeah.
It's like, I always say that. Like,
but
I'm
you know
looking
what?
for that.
Those people, they need someone who's got innovative ideas, who's creative and a front man and gonna be. They don't have that, right? So they're sickly. Yeah. They're quiet in an office, chugging, doing, but like highly valuable. So at a company, I also advise employers, like, put those people together, to complement each other, and you'll have the best, team doing what you want done.
My next book that I've been working on forever and I'm dragging my heels on because I don't have a publisher, so I don't have a deadline. My first book, I had like a legal contract and got an advance and all that. So I was like, okay, I guess I better write this book. And I did. And that was pre-diagnosis as a kind of a miracle. Thank God for my wife. But this next book idea and something I've been teaching and pulling from, I call it the root down. And it's sort of 3 sections of like, know yourself, respect yourself, and connect yourself. And so the idea and exercises I have to better know yourself, and that includes your neurotype if you have ADHD, but that's obviously, or anything else for that matter, or our ADHD, as it were. But also that includes your own strengths. And I know like strengths assessments, Myers-Briggs, DISC and stuff, Big Five and all that are not necessarily scientific. However, they do shed a light and help remind you of your strengths. Something I always recommend my clients do as for coaching and stuff is something I call like a superpower exercise, which is kind of icky when you sit down to do it, but you got to do it. And the idea, and I've done it myself, and the idea is you make a list of like 10 or 15 people who know you well throughout your life. So it could be like childhood friends, could be colleagues today, could be managers, clients, whatever, excluding your family. And you just email them and you say, hey, Gail, it's been a while, but knowing me, how you know me, what would you say? Just humor me here, but what would you say my superpower is? And you send this brief email out to 10 or 15 people. You'll get replies from maybe, hopefully 8 or 10 of them. But nowadays I use AI and kind of combine the results from those. When I first did this, I printed it on paper and sat and really stewed and read all these replies. Some of them were like a line or two, and others were like paragraphs. And I kind of landed on sort of communication as sort of my sweet spot, but also storytelling and podcasting and public speaking and comedy and things. And then, so that's sort of the know yourself, respecting yourself includes journaling, includes, having a growth mindset, following Carol Dweck's work. And your journaling, meditation, mindfulness, therapy, and all these things. And then the last part is kind of combating loneliness, which is an epidemic in this country and most for that matter. And so it's like connecting yourself with others. My first book is about networking. So it's about like, and I get lonely. I'm happily married, but we all do. And nowadays when we're all talking to these things and we're all on our phones on the subway or out and about, it's about, I could talk for a long time about, I wrote a blog post called The Power of Proximity and the importance in this day and age of being in person and meeting up in person, because I think we're craving that. And I think with AI and stuff, it's going to be more important than ever. But I've been rambling here, but what are your thoughts on kind of those three sort of sections? I'd be curious.
Well, I would say the overlay to everything, like I said before, of like what you can be doing and to those things is, if you do have symptoms, as we're talking to hopefully everybody today, you do need treatment.
Yes.
Like I do want to say, like, I don't want to be you do need treatment, and doing all these great things that you're talking about or I'm talking about without treatment, you're not getting the bang for your buck. You're going to be. And the other thing I'd like to say is that I know you're talking to people who have been diagnosed since adulthood till adulthood. And that's hard, right? Because a lot of time has gone by, and maybe in your mind, opportunities and time periods that feel lost or you have regret about. But I say, like, you've got to forgive, you've got to forgive the time that has happened, but do not only get treatment, but do it ASAP.
Yes.
So, people delay because they deny, and because it's painful, and they feel regret, and they feel sort of like, if I start this treatment, then I'm acknowledging that this has always been a problem, and, I lost all this stuff, and it makes them think about all this negative stuff. But the sooner, our brains are plastic, meaning it's the only organ that we have that grows new neurons and new neurocircuitry. And treatment does that. It changes your neurocircuitry because you're using new skills, essentially, right? And it strengthens the neurocircuitry that you want to be stronger, which paradoxically weakens the neurocircuitry that you stop rerunning and using. That may be like part of the symptom. And so our brains stay plastic for life. It's true, they're more plastic the younger we are, and that plasticity slows up over lifetime, but they stay plastic. That's why, like, an older person who has a stroke can still, not always, but often, like, relearn to whatever they lost. And so I want to say overall, right, get the treatment, get it as quickly as you can, and then do these other things that you are talking about. Yes, do those things. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I think I'm really excited about our future generations right now. I'm really excited. Something I've landed on is that, there's a lot of mis and disinformation out there about trauma causing ADHD. Head trauma, it's possible, but as far as emotional trauma, there's no science backing that up, as far as I know. It's misinformation. But
I think we do have some real concerns about social media's impact on, and screen time's impact on children's brains.
Yes,
and I think there's some legitimate neuroscientific concerns about that. And I would really, like, for a multitude of reasons, but also for this reason. Don't introduce screens to young children. Hold off on those phones till they're, Surgeon General, couple years ago, not before the age of 13, really try to minimize that. It's having an impact, and in terms of ADHD.
My kids are 19 and 20, and I've told them both that, like, one day we will look back at photos of our generation like we look back to my generation, your generation of old photos of people smoking cigarettes. We'll look at all the photos of people holding their phones and be like, oh, geez, I can't believe we used to do that, or let our kids do that. I really do believe that. Phones are great. They have a lot of great things about them, but social media, as you said, for kids, it's just not a good situation. The point about trauma I wanted to just mention, though, is that because we're reducing the stigmas associated with mental health, and because of people like yourself doing this important work and speaking out about encouraging people to get treatment and to get support that they need, and for more parents who are learning they have ADHD, because a lot of the times they're finding out their kid has ADHD. But as far as these family dynamics and trauma, I know that I experienced a fair amount of trauma as a kid from my parents because of their undiagnosis and untreatment of their ADHD, which is highly heritable, almost as heritable as height. And so because of these things, impulsivity and alcohol and all the things, I faced trauma, right? And what's so cool now, though, is in this generation, while we're removing stigmas and getting people the help they need, as an adult, I know about ADHD. If I have kids and one is diagnosed with ADHD or both or whatever, I can now approach them treating myself to know how not to repeat that thing. And for generations, because ADHD has been around as long as we have, this trauma has from undiagnosed and untreated people has gone on and on and on. And what's so cool now is that I think the future is going to be much brighter for our kids and grandkids because of removing these stigmas. They won't face the traumas of alcoholism or whatever these traumas could be.
Right? Hopefully they'll also learn that they don't have to avoid the diagnosis because their kid can soar.
Yeah.
Their kid can not only get treatment and suffer less, but their kid has potential strengths emulating some of the most successful people in society that gives them special abilities, and they should help their kid play to that. And if parents have that in their head, then we would shorten the window that exists today where the time difference between presentation of symptoms and diagnosis is 3 to 5 years. That's too long.
Yeah.
That's too long. That's a lot of suffering. And it's not because parents don't love their children with all their heart. Of course they do. Yeah. It's because it's very hard, because they have in their head, oh, if I acknowledge this, then I have just acknowledged some terrible outcome for my child, right? They will be ill and not successful, and what will their future be? But that's not the case. That's not the case.
It's not. Oh my God, this time has just run out so quickly. I could talk to you for hours. I'm so sorry that we have to wrap up, and we haven't even talked enough about your book, and I apologize. I need to get you back on to talk more about that.
It's crazy about this book. Well, I wrote the book because I've had a long lived practice in New York City where I see very successful people. They're here in New York City, and it became clear to me that the issue which they came in for was part and parcel of their very successful lives, just in many instances. I did this series at the 92nd Street Y called Psychobiography, where I looked for a historic, iconic person of history who changed their field, in leadership, in the arts, in music, and science. And with a historian, we discussed sort of what made that person tick, and how what made them tick lent to their success in the field that they were in. And it was hard to find anyone who was iconic, who didn't turn out to have a mental health issue or a learning disability. So that was really struck me. And this seemed like, and it was important to look at the research, look at literally the neuroscientific research, to look at what might explain what was going on here. And also, of course, along the way, furthering my dedication to how do we reduce stigma in this country? So it's sort of wrapped all together. And it really resonated with, I think, people were like, oh my goodness, this makes a lot of sense given what I've done in my life. And, I think just people didn't have like a name or reason and articulation for that. Actually, this book is crazy because it's a nonfiction book, obviously, right? I'm a psychiatrist, nonfiction book. But a year ago, a group came to me from the UK and asked, they wanted to make this book into a theater production.
No way.
And I was like, I'm a psychiatrist and this is a nonfiction book, right? It's not.
Yeah.
But yeah, so actually in 2 weeks, I'm going over there.
No way.
For the opening night being held at the National Archives in the UK of The Power of Different. And I'm going to do a talk back after the show.
That's amazing.
And it's amazing. And it's a whole different audience, right? It's people who think that talking about neurodiversity would be like an interesting topic to see theatrically performed, basically. So I'm excited. It will reach a different audience, this content. Yeah.
And especially in the arts too, because like so many artists and creatives,
Yes.
I mean, I fell down a rabbit hole researching like old musicians, singers, like of bands I used to listen to growing up. And like all of them have ADHD. It's like
that is right.
That makes sense.
High preponderance of people in the arts across the board, different arts that do have ADHD. Yeah. So yes.
That's so exciting. I worked in performing arts. I was the marketing manager for Hairspray, the John Waters musical in Toronto a million years ago. So I got to, of course, come to the show in New York as I was working on the show in Toronto. And yeah, I love performing arts. I love, comedy and theater and stuff. So yeah, I'll have to get over to.
We'll see what happens if it gets funding to move anywhere. We'll see.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Well, congrats on that. And where can people get a hold of you, learn more? Obviously, get your book. I think your publisher said that, or your publicist said, we'll have a couple copies to send to a couple lucky viewers, listeners of the podcast. So we'll figure that out. Just people can go to wisesquirrels.com for info on that, and we'll figure that out. But
that sounds great. And I'm in the usual, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, webpage spots, always under @Dr. Gail Saltz.
Awesome. Well, thanks a million again. I appreciate having you. It's been a pleasure.
It was lovely to chat with you and hear your story too.
Thanks for listening to this final episode of the season. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've got a couple of copies of Dr. Saltz's books available for giveaway. And to sign up, check out wisesquirrels.com. Head over to the show notes blog post from today's episode, and you'll get the details there. And good luck. If you enjoyed the show today, please leave a rating and review. This helps other Wise Squirrels discover the show and reminds me to keep doing this. Do you have questions or comments? Want to share an audio comment or question? Do you have questions about joining the nest, or are you interested in a free coaching session with me? Just visit wisesquirrels.com for details. Support of the podcast comes from our generous sponsors, our guests, and you. Thank you for being here. Without you, I'd be talking to myself, and that's no fun. Hosting for Wise Squirrels is provided by our friends at the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. You'll find special event invitations, links, show notes, free resources, and a whole bunch more at wisesquirrels.com. And while you're there, sign up for the newsletter. That way you'll never miss another episode. We'll see you soon. Thanks for being here.
Hey, it's Dr. George Sachs, co-founder of Inflow and proud sponsor of Wise Squirrels. If you're living with ADHD, you know it's not just about the focus. That's why we created Inflow. And our newest tool, Quinn AI, an empathetic ADHD micro-coach. Together, they're designed by expert clinicians to help you understand your brain, build habits that actually stick, and feel less alone in the process. Take the free ADHD traits quiz at wisesquirrels.com/inflow to get started.